No, it just, the whole domestic violence, there was a whole nother
Yeah,
code law into
the federal, that big federal law, I can't remember what it was called, but yeah, if you've ever been charged with a domestic violence or whatever, it can be tough.
because then they can no longer possess. So it's crazy with everything that you've got going now.
Yeah.
Our officers went to a domestic and they ended up seizing the firearm from the residents, charged them with the assault on a female. The case was adjudicated. It was dismissed. The wife didn't want to pursue it any further, and he came by with an order. We only took it for safekeeping. We're a city agency. He got an order from our DA's office saying that the gun is no longer needed as evidence, although it was never evidence in the case. When I did the F-check through DCI, his qualification status came back as unknown in the state of North Carolina, disqualified in the state of Georgia. But when I've asked him about Georgia, if he's ever lived there, and he said no. I'm like, at this time, I can't give you your firearm. And he's like, am I going to have to sue you? I said, do what you've got to do. But at this time, without further investigation, I can't give you a firearm back.
Yeah.
What do you do with the unknown status?
I couldn't answer you on that. What I can answer you on, the part of what you're proposing is the fact that the gun was seized during the commission of some type of crime, but you're saying it wasn't.
It wasn't used in the crime. I'm not.
But they seized it at the time?
They seized it at the time. He basically literally threw his wife outside of the apartment and locked her out.
Well, unless they've changed this part that I haven't looked at yet, anytime a firearm is seized by a law enforcement officer, the court has to make a disposition on it.
Okay.
So, and I've had that argument for years and years and years with our district attorney's office, I just had it like 6 months before I retired about, why are you telling me I have to do a court order to give this guy his gun back? I'm telling you to give it back to him. And I said, yeah, that's fine, but you're going to do it in writing, and I prefer a court order. And then I had to sit down and actually read the statute to him that says the district attorney, decides what happens, and it must be done in a court order. So they should still give you a court order, even though the gun may not be directly connected to a particular crime. It was still seized during that investigation, and it's a part of the case just because it seized property. Yeah.
The court order only says it may be returned, that it's no longer needed. But I'm like, his qualification status to actually possess a firearm is unknown.
Yeah, like the order you're talking about is good for all other property, but when it's a firearm, it has to be a court order. So, but with the qualification status, I'm not familiar with that personally, so I don't want to tell you some answer because I don't know. But to me, he wouldn't be able to get it back.
Right.
And you could even get like maybe fingerprints, having to do a background check, get a background check done through Georgia with the fingerprints and everything to prove that's not him on that record.
Right. Because it did show up as multiple aliases, and that was my question is this an alias of somebody else? The criminal was using his name,
Very
and
well
he's
could
just
be.
fallen victim to this.
It very well could be, and especially if you start talking about Soundex names in DCI and everything, then you get a bunch. Because
Right.
I've often wondered how they get that name out of that name. I don't know.
Right.
But a lot of times, talking about that, most people are persistent if they want their stuff back, and they'll keep pushing the matter. Get it out of your hands and just say you need to go through the court system to get it done. Even if they end up suing the department just to get their property back. I mean, that's better than you doing something unlawful, and getting the department in trouble. Because that's all he's going to do is go before a judge and say, I want my property back.
We have a domestic violence gun. The domestic violence order is a Virginia order. When the case was over, I called Virginia to see what their process, how do I get up there to get into their court and, do a motion because, to get this gun either returned or destroyed or whatever. Virginia says when the order is over in their state, all they do is give the gun back if the guy comes up wants it. They don't do a motion, they don't do a hearing, anything. And so I talked to our district attorney, and they said, no, we don't have jurisdiction to do that. That's not what our domestic violence orders say. But our courts don't have jurisdiction over the gun. So I went to our county attorney and I said, what do we do? And she said, we can get the gun turned over to him. And she did some kind of paperwork, and I don't know what it was. But so I called the man, I said, you can come get your gun. And he said, okay. And I said, and here's going to be the storage fee. And there was total silence. And he said, it was like $200 and some. He said, I don't have that kind of money.
Right.
And he said, I'm just not going to come get the gun. Do what you want to with it. Well, now I've got a gun that I have no jurisdiction over because our courts will not do a court order on it because we don't have jurisdiction. Virginia's telling me I don't need a court order to dispose of the gun because all they do is give them straight back to the defendant.
But their court has no jurisdiction here.
That's exactly what I've done. It's back in the court.
Yeah, I was going to say, put in UPS and send it back to Virginia.
And says, so,
But you seized it based on the Virginia order to seize it because he violated whatever?
so could you get him to sign something saying that we have a form for when people bring in their guns or ammo, whatever, they no longer want it. We have a form we get them to sign saying that I'm relinquishing my rights to this property. I'm turning it over to the police department for them to do, for them to dispose of it accordingly. And they sign it over. Like I've got a BB gun and some regular guns and knives and things like that. So I was wondering, is that something that you could do, like get him to sign over saying he doesn't want it anymore, he's turning it over to the police department, then you can legally dispose of it, because it's there, Yeah, that's how I said, it'd be unclaimed, abandoned property, so you wouldn't need an order to destroy it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess that's true. I mean, if he was eligible to receive it back, had he paid the money and he didn't do, then basically our courts would have jurisdiction because he didn't pay the fee. And I don't remember in the 50B part what it says happens to the gun if they don't pay the storage fee. Is that what it is? For?
I can't remember what it said. There is a section under that storage fee
If
it's not paid, it's turned over to the Department of Use Construction or something.
Oh, okay.
It is on the order.
All right. Sure. That's a solution to a problem. Anything else? Anything not about guns? Got any DNA questions?
How much time do you have?
I'll just point out, did anybody see our attorney on TV here, on CNN or anything? What was the guy's name? Yeah, the two that were just released from North Carolina after 31 years on the Innocence Commission. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Sad, but it's cool ending, I guess.
Well, hopefully, the district attorney is looking into prosecuting
Oh,
the alternate suspects, so that will be
a plus.
a good ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I often wondered about that as well as the fact these cigarette butts and drink cans that they talked about, was that still available?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Really?
and the
So
district-
even though the case was disposed of 30-some years ago, they were still maintaining the evidence?
They were.
Awesome.
They were. And the commission's worked really closely with the district attorney. And, part of our job is to do that. And part of what we do is work with him. And we turned over our whole file to him, and he's looking into those charges. So
Yeah,
that is a good outcome for us.
awesome. Can you answer this? As far as them still having the evidence available, is that something they just done because of the notoriety of the case? Because it's obviously before the DNA retention law was in effect.
It is not. That's a little bit more complicated.
Or did they just not
They-
ever throw it away?
There's two parts to that. They didn't know they had the evidence. They literally, part of the evidence they really didn't know that they had. They had done an inventory, and the evidence was listed on their inventory, but not, it was not labeled. So the commission had a court order for that evidence, and they did do a search for it. The police department did do a search for it, but they came back and said, we actually don't have it. The reason they said that is because it wasn't labeled. So they didn't know that that physical evidence that they had in their inventory room belonged to that case.
Right.
So it is wonderful that they kept it. A lot of agencies are doing that. You're right, they didn't have a retention policy to keep the evidence in Leon Brown's case. However, in Henry McCollum's, they did have to keep it because he's on death row, or he was on death row. So they actually would have had to maintain it. And they were required to keep it, and so there's a lot of issues happening with that.
So there was an order issued at some point to maintain.
Well, he was in
One of
prison
them.
for life,
Yeah.
so they would have had to have always maintained the evidence on death row, or he was on death row. He wasn't in prison for life, but they would have been required to keep it, because you have to remember the statute that was, what year did that happen? 2001. That's retroactive. So if you have evidence in your possession, you have to maintain it and keep it.
But 30-some years ago, that wasn't in effect.
Right, so from 83 to 2001, they could have destroyed it at any time, absolutely.
Right.
And they just didn't.
That's not uncommon.
Right. That's why I was thinking, hey, this case is over. He's in,
Yep.
prior to, he's in
Absolutely.
prison. I'm getting rid of this stuff. Of course, with a court order. But that's something for everybody in the room to remember and realize too, particularly if you're new and you're just taking over an evidence room. Just because it's in there and the case is disposed of and it's 30-year-old case, don't mean you can just, okay, we're getting rid of it. Got to get a court order or check the status of the offender if they're still incarcerated.
Yeah, definitely. So it's really a good thing they didn't in that
Yeah.
particular case. And then, the other person, Roscoe Artist, there are cases, for example, there's another, he's quite a history, and what is public record, there was another case that he was involved in where the evidence was destroyed, and he was charged with a murder in that case, and they destroyed the evidence because he was on death row for a completely different murder and rape, and they were like, well, we don't need this evidence anymore because he's on death row and he's going to be executed. So we don't even need to charge him with this. Or they did charge him. We don't even need to take it to trial. They dismissed the charges because why did it matter, right? He was on death row, and they were like, he's
kill him
going
but
to be
once.
executed. Except that sentence was commuted.
Right.
And he's
exactly.
actually not on death row, and in fact was up for parole and could have been paroled. So that's important to remember too, that they destroyed that evidence believing, back in 1983 that death meant death. And so they were like, well, you can only kill him once, and look, we don't have to keep it. But that man was up for parole and would have been paroled, but for the commission becoming involved and, all
Right.
of this turning out the way it did, he would have, he was on work release. He was out in the community. So it's just a good thing to remember that even though you think evidence, you might look it up and be like, oh, that's not important evidence anymore. It's always important. If you have someone out there, even if they're in prison, you don't want them back in the community. So
Right. And that could have been a very easy scenario where they were hopefully not for a murder, but for example, two murders at the same time,
Right.
and he was the suspect, and we got really, really good evidence on this, so we're just gonna prosecute him for this and not worry about this one
Right.
over here. And then you end up destroying this for whatever reason. I don't know why you'd want to do it. Suspect unknown or something, I don't know. And then turn around and he gets an appeal
Right.
or anything and gets kicked out. Then all this you done gotten rid of. But okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I'm enjoying retirement, I'll tell you that. Like I said, I retired in May, and I've been helping my son remodel his house all summer long. So I'm still trying to stay involved. I'm still on the auxiliary with the sheriff's office. The sheriff says as long as I stay on the auxiliary, he'll keep paying my membership for here. So y'all stuck with me for for a little while longer.
So you're available for home improvement projects?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if you'll like my work or not, but I work cheap. That's what I was telling somebody earlier. My son, he actually works at the sheriff's office now, and he's really cheap. I think he's bought me one $3 used video game since we've done this thing. So that's been my pay for 5 months of work. But yeah, if you ever have any questions, about property and evidence, I still got a lot of stuff fresh on my mind. So, give me a call. Because when I updated my contact information at the last conference, it's all my personal email and personal telephone number. So, you feel free to reach out and ask me if you can't find me somewhere. I kind of messed over John there. He called me, I think 3 days after I retired, and I was like, I'm not going to call him right now. And I seen him today for the first time, and I said, man, I never called you back. He said, I thought you was dead. But I really have been busy. And